You're watching the MVPITPro podcast, the only podcast where you enter as an IT pro and leave an MVP. This podcast is brought to you by Altaro Software, makers of Altaro VM Backup and Five9, Mission Control for your Microsoft Cloud. And now, your hosts, Andy Syrewicze and Rob Corradini. Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the MVPITPro podcast, the only podcast where you enter as an IT pro and leave an MVP. My name is Andy Syrewicze, and I'm joined as always by my good friend here, Rob Corradini. How's it going, Rob?
Living the dream, Andy. Living the dream, as you can see. I just coming over a cold, so if I seem a little drowsy, that's okay. It probably maybe let me talk about these topics a little easier. I'm kidding.
Well, if you start falling asleep over there, I've got your cell phone number. I'll give you a call. So we'll do it that way. So
exactly. Don't do that. It might scare me.
It might scare you. Hey, we were just talking about that episode of the IT crowd, right? Where he was messing around with the vibration setting on his phone.
Vibrate.
And it rang, and he thought he was dying. Anyway. If you haven't seen that show, everybody go watch it. It's hilarious.
It's on YouTube now, I believe, right? The IT crowd now.
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
And it's timeless. You can never
it is absolutely
watching those. All right, well, I think we need to get going.
We do. We got a great show lined up for you today. We've got a great interview later in the segment with Rossen Atanassov from the Microsoft Edge team, don't we?
Oh yeah, a very exciting interview. Something that kind of took me by surprise, near and dear to my heart. Rossen used to work for me, I'm dating myself now, 16, 17 years ago, as an intern when he was in college. And, fast forward to the present, and he now is running on, he's one of the leads on the Edge team. I can't remember the exact title, but it's amazing.
Yeah, it was a really, really interesting interview because, historically, I've always been focused more on infrastructure, right, in cloud and virtualization. So
yeah.
Really getting down into a specific application and talking about it, it was really interesting because, we found out that Edge is doing way more than you think it's doing, right? So, it's kind of interesting. So that'll be a great interview to share a little bit later in the segment. But I kind of want to first start with our Newsflash segment like we always do. This is the segment of the show where we talk about some of the new and fascinating things going on in the Microsoft world. And the first thing I wanted to start with is we have a new insider preview build out there. I forget the actual build number. I think it's 17692. Yep.
Yes, I was just we were just talking about that. Downloading that was a little hectic, but it's on its way from me, and I'm putting that in my lab ASAP.
Yep.
And by the way, to go along with that insider build is also the new Windows Admin Center 1803.
Yeah,
FYI.
They're churning out new releases for those like crazy. I think I was looking at the release notes, and there's a lot of cool stuff in this build. So the two big things for me is they've brought back I shouldn't say brought back, but for Server 2019, they now have the Hyper-V server SKU. So the free version of Hyper-V that you can use to host Linux VMs for free. If you want to do Windows VMs, you still have to bring your own licensing, but it's a great free option for those people that are hosting Linux virtual machines in their environment. The other big thing for me was the new Features on Demand function for Windows Server Core install. So
that is awesome.
It's huge. Yeah. It's huge. I kind of glazed over it at first, but when I went back and actually read the release notes in detail, I then realized how huge this is. So basically what it allows us to do is we can now bring in some of the those management tools that we're used to having, bring them in an on-demand fashion into Windows Server Core. So now I can run Cluster Manager inside Server Core. I can run SQL Server Management Studio. Things like that. Performance Monitor, Procmon. Those tools that we love to have locally on the machine that have not historically been there in Server Core. So that's kind of a big deal in my opinion. So I was really happy.
It's about convenience. Even though we're pushing for no UI. But we also need convenience from time to time, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've got a good buddy from Belgium, another Microsoft MVP, Didier Van Hooy. He always puts this perfectly. Yes, we want to get to a GUI-less state, But the nice thing about the GUI sometimes, the full GUI install, is you have all the tools available to get yourself out of a pickle. That's what he says. You've got all the tools available to get yourself out of a pickle, and he's right? I mean, he's absolutely right.
Oh, that's so funny. Absolutely. I can't argue with that.
He's absolutely right. And I mean, now they're starting to kind of close some of these gaps. I mean, historically you could do it with PowerShell and Server Core, right? But not everybody is, to that level with PowerShell, So I mean,
it comes down, you really have to be proficient, especially when you want to add in specific parameters and stuff like that.
Exactly.
It's not something that that you just jump off the boat running.
Exactly, and an outage situation is not some place where you want to be learning new PowerShell skills.
Yeah, you want to hit a UI and hit a button and you're
right,
rolling.
Exactly. So that was a big announcement in my opinion. So that was really cool to see. The other big news-related item that I wanted to bring up is the Windows Server Summit. So this is a new virtual event that Microsoft is putting on this year. They've got a bunch of people from the Windows Server team lined up to kind of do a day-long virtual conference. So I know Jeff Woolsey is talking. He's going to be talking about Windows Admin Center. They have a whole bunch of other speakers lined up to kind of give Windows Server some love, really. I mean, there's been this this misconception in the industry as of late that Microsoft, they hate Windows Server. It's all about Azure, and that's completely false. And I think have them putting on this Windows Server Summit is they're trying to move the pendulum in the other direction. They're trying to get rid of that incorrect opinion in the industry. And so I urge you, if you're interested in the server, learning about some of the new stuff that's coming up in Windows Server 2019, be sure to check out the Windows Server Summit, and we'll be sure to include some links below this video that you can click on and get all the information needed to sign up for that.
I will say, speaking of Woolsey, he did mention with Windows Admin Center some cloud-related features, something around Azure site recovery. I called him out on something when he mentioned that with the new release of Windows Admin Center 1803. And then he came back and talked about Azure site recovery and Azure backup, which is interesting.
It is very interesting because now it's almost like they're using that to push vendors to adopt that platform for extensibility. Because I mean, if I'm a server,
that's pretty loud and clear there.
Yeah, exactly. Because if I'm a server administrator, I need backup. Oh, hey, look, here's Azure Backup built right into the admin center, And I mean, a lot of people historically are going to want options, right? And so, I mean, the extensibility of Windows Admin Center kind of lends itself well to, I don't want to say like a store, like a virtual app store for Admin Center, but that's kind of what it's going to become, right? I mean, you could have all these third party.
Well, that's why I kind of pictured as Windows Admin Center App Store, which is really a app store for Windows Server. If you think
exactly.
About it. Yeah.
Did you ever think we'd be in that world, an app store for Windows Server?
No, not really. I'm thinking about this now. But
I know.
Oh, I kind of scared myself.
That's right. Well, at least it's keeping you awake, right? You said you were sleepy earlier. So.
Exactly.
So.
No, I do have coffee here. I am drinking.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, hey, I think that wraps it up for our news section. Did you have anything else you wanted to share, Rob?
No, I think that was my big thing. I kind of harped on the Windows Admin Center myself. I'm in the midst. Next time around, our next episode, I'll have a lot more to say. I'm more specifically interested in what their system insights or system insights. Is that what they call it?
Yeah,
features of Admin Center. And I'll report back a lot on that one in our next episode. Let's get rolling.
Excited to hear more about that one. I kind of want to kick the tires on that one myself, but I'm going to try and do that with all that free time I have, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we all have free time.
Well, I guess with that, we'll move on to our next segment, which is called Don't Quit Your Day Job. So basically, the whole purpose of this segment is, while Rob and I love putting on this podcast and everything, it doesn't always pay the bills. So, the idea here is, what have we been working on in our professional lives? What have we been working on in our personal lives from a technology perspective that we find is interesting and worth talking about? So, Rob, I guess I'll let you go ahead first. You mentioned something about a Nutanix cluster earlier.
A little bit of Nutanix hell, and I'm not bad-mouthing Nutanix, just more of troubleshooting and being an engineer. So I run a Nutanix cluster. It was running the previous latest build, which was put out earlier this year, January of this year. And I went to upgrade to the latest build that they just released, I want to say in the last week or two. Has a lot of new supportability. One thing I noticed off the bat is there were warnings up and down during the, on the README notes before installing.
And you ignored the warnings, didn't you?
Oh, well, come on, it's Community Edition. And anything I care about really is backed up. So I went through and started upgrading and doing the normal fares, and all of a sudden, 3/4 of the way, meaning I have a 4-node cluster. On the 4th node in the cluster, sure enough, it gets hung up, and that's all she wrote. Could not get the cluster to get that node back in the cluster. I went and, in fact, stopped the actual cluster, restarted it, restarted the entire hardware node cluster. At that point, the entire cluster wouldn't restart again at all. I was like, okay, this is too much aggravation. So let's say, okay, let's start out fresh. And clean is always good.
Right.
So you do have to go through a little bit of an effort. They have a new ISO installer where you can get an ISO disk and hook up CD-ROMs, but I prefer to use flash drives. And you prepare these flash drives. They take quite a bit of time because you're imaging these flash drives with basically a VM image. And essentially, once you've done that, you boot up and you go through a process of building out your cluster. The one thing that shocked me that I've never seen before in this version was choice of hypervisor. It wasn't just a Acropolis hypervisor that they were pushing. It had, do you want to do Hyper-V? Do you want to do ESX? And I was like, whoa, and there was a drop down there. And I went to Hyper-V. I looked at the drop down. It asked me for the SKU or the serial key. I put the key in, and it asked for to upload an ISO. I was like, whoa. Awesome. Now, and there's a little question mark there. It even gave you the supported ISOs that you could download from Microsoft.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting because historically, Nutanix has pushed their own hypervisor, which, for those that aren't aware, Acropolis hypervisor is...
which is a variant of KVM.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So now I just find it interesting that they're now allowing you the option of selecting your hypervisor of choice. I mean, I'm all for that. Don't get me wrong,
that's always been the case on the regular side of things, but now they're allowing it on Community Edition. It's kind of a big deal. Now, yes, because you've always been able to buy Nutanix Hyper-V, Nutanix ESX, whatever. You just pay for whatever the licensing costs if you went to a different hypervisor, right? Now, doing this on Community Edition, I think opens up a new world. What it tells me is that Nutanix realizing that their hypervisor is not the only one out there, and they're not going to gain tremendous market share by just, pushing theirs as the number one and putting everybody else as a third-class citizen, right? And that's the way I feel about it. And I think they're putting a foot forward to change that and really show people choice. That's the perception I got out of it. I'll let you know when I go down the realms of going Hyper-V. I end up building as an AHV cluster just out of simplicity and to be fast. But it was a great project. Once I actually went through the process of getting the actual nodes up and running and then actually forming the cluster, it was relatively fairly simple. They definitely have introduced some cool stuff along with their Prism Central that allows you to do multi-cluster management. So a lot of neat stuff to play with. I'll probably report back a little bit more, but there you go. There's my nighttime jobs.
Nice.
And by the way, I had to rebuild my Docker environment, my Windows Server environment, all that stuff. That's all included in all that night stuff.
So you've been busy.
Yeah, a little. Go ahead.
Well, I guess I'll mention some of the stuff that I've been working on. So I have been spending quite a bit of time dusting off the old SyrewicheIT.com blog. So
this is awesome. Go ahead.
Before I came on board with Altaro, I had my own blog, and since I came on with Altaro, I've been blogging for Altaro ever since then. So my personal blog kind of it started getting dusty and not used. And so I decided, a couple weeks ago, okay, I'm going to revive this thing and I'm going to use it to talk about, Microsoft and Microsoft's relationship with open source and that new emerging space that Microsoft is creating, right? So, so I decided, okay, I've got my hoster that I've been using for years over here. But
just so you know, I just want to make a vision that Andy was a visionary way back then, just before the whole GitHub thing. Go ahead.
Right. Anyway, so I haven't really been all that happy with the hoster I've been using all these years. So I'm like, okay, I've got Azure here. Azure is a fantastic platform for web apps, and so I had a choice. I'm like, okay, I can host it inside of a VM, like I think you do with your blog, Rob, netwatch.me, if I remember correctly, and or I could go the PaaS route. And I'm like, well, it's a cloud-centric world these days, right? So why don't I go ahead and use PaaS? So I actually, with very little experience in dealing with Azure web apps in PaaS, I've been working with them in VMs in Azure for a long time, but have had relatively little experience with them in PaaS. And I got my site spun up, moved. It didn't take as long as I thought. It was ridiculously easy. I got my SSL certificate from DigiCert generated and added into the sites. I got my DNS records updated. And I mean, it really was.
Are you using Azure DNS?
I am not, no. So I'm using an outside DNS host because, I wanted to keep the same registrar as my SyrewicheIT.com domain because I actually changed the domain name that I'm going to use for the site. Now it's andyontech.com, which is a lot easier to remember and spell than my my last name correctly. Because, you tell people to go to SyrewicheIT.com, they look at you funny, and they start getting this weird twitch as they try to figure out how to spell my last name, right? So that's it wasn't really an option to have that be my primary. So, so I kind of wanted to keep the two together, so I'm using an outside DNS host other than Azure for that. So it's been relatively painless, and it's been a fairly easy process. So
I'd like to compare notes at some point on your WordPress PaaS experience versus my WordPress IaaS experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Is it really necessary for me to be this way versus the other? I've looked at it. I ran into a wall. I can't remember what the wall was at the time. This is months and months ago.
Yeah.
And went the IaaS route. But I'd be interested to look at that again because maybe it's something you'd figured out and I didn't.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about it. There is one little weird thing that I've run into since it's been running there for a little while now. So I have a security product running on the site that just kind of scans the site every so often to make sure that, hey, everything's happy and healthy. And I can actually tell with my security application when my site hops nodes inside of the Azure data center.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I can actually tell.
That's pretty slick.
Because I get an alert that, whoa, hey, your DNS records have changed. And what's happening is how you get your site.azurewebsites.net? Well, internally in the data center, there's a CNAME for that depending on where in the data center it is. So at first I was like, whoa, has my DNS been compromised? I'm like, what's going on? And then I started digging into it. I'm like, oh, look, I'm
going to say Andy's floating blog. Right. Andy's floating blog on Azure. That's awesome. That's a perfect byline.
Right, exactly. So, I can actually see that it's moving around. So they were doing some maintenance or something, I'm sure, and my site stayed up, right?
That's the purpose.
Exactly. So
zero downtime.
Exactly. The other thing I learned, and again, this is probably me not having experience with hosting web apps in PaaS and Azure, is I thought this was my assumption, was that the app service account and your web app was kind of a one-to-one relationship, but you can host multiple web apps inside of a single service account. So if you want to host 10 websites in the West US data center, you have that ability, as long as you're not, using more resources than your service plan gives you. But of course, you can always go in and change that service plan to give you more resources, right? That whole idea of cloud scale. So,
and that's the thing. And the biggest thing that I hear about Azure, and I don't want to go too crazy. I think we could spend a good episode on this.
Definitely.
Azure consumption and how costs can get out of control.
Yep.
I have this conversation quite often, and the one thing I can say is stay within your app service plans, keep your limits on.
Yes, exactly. Keep your limits on, definitely. You hear those horror stories about, oh crap, I forgot to turn off that G Series VM, and now I have a $5,000 bill, you know? I mean, for those that don't know, G Series VMs in Azure are huge. If I remember correctly, the G stands for Godzilla, correct?
Godzilla, something like that, yeah. It's like the old days of your kids calling those chat lines and the numbers. Well, I'm now dating myself. But go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say my son's only 9, so I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, you got the internet to worry about.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, well, the other thing that I've been working on lately, that we'll touch on just really quick because I know everybody's anxious to get to our interview, but I've been doing a lot of work with Markdown and VS Code. So, so I run, Rob, I run Linux on my laptop and I run Windows on my desktop. And, the thing that I've run into is that OneNote is great, but I don't have a OneNote option on Linux. So I needed something that allowed me to do notes, the same notes on both platforms. So I started looking at VS Code, and I came across this extension called VS Code-Journal. And if you search for it in the VS Code extensions, you'll find it. And what this does is it allows you to use Markdown inside of VS Code in a very automated and tightly integrated fashion to just keep notes. I've been really happy with it so far. It automatically creates the hierarchy for you. So here's your month and your days. And if you create like a separate note, so let's say I have a meeting that I'm taking notes on, that meeting happened that day, you can hit a couple of keystrokes and it automatically creates a separate Markdown file for you and links it to your note file for that day. I mean, it works really well for the way that my brain functions from a task perspective. So it was really helpful and really useful in that use case. So I've been doing a lot with that recently as well. So
I know Andy just turned this on to me, and I'm already starting to get excited about using it myself. Previous to this, I was using Notepad++. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So very awesome.
Yeah, it's been really handy so far. So I'll have to do a blog post on that at some point because it's been that useful to me. So I've really been getting excited about soft skills, I guess is what the industry is calling them these days. I mean, it's not all about the tech, but the soft skills as well. And I think that's a proper note-taking and documentation is a really important soft skill. So I'll have to do a blog post about that at some point. So actually,
Andy, you'd be the perfect person for that.
Well, give it a shot. So, well, hey, I know we got to get to the interview here, but I again, the show is called the MVPITPro podcast, so we always like to just give some helpful tips in every episode, so that if we have any viewers that want to become a Microsoft MVP, we like to provide some insight and some tips on how to do that. So I wanted to spend a little bit today just talking about public speaking. Now, I say those two words, public speaking, to a tech crowd, and I've probably lost half of our audience just now. They're probably running and hiding in their server rooms now. But if you want to share your knowledge, blogging it's a great way to do it, right? I mean, it's a great way to get your knowledge out there in a written format and share it. Participating in docs.microsoft.com, participating in online communities and forums and Reddit. I mean, that's all great stuff to do, right? But eventually, you probably want to start doing some sessions at conferences or doing some webinars, and public speaking becomes a part of it at that point, right? And
you want people to put a name to a face,
exactly,
of what because if they're reading all this, they want to see if this person exists.
Exactly, definitely. And I know public speaking was something that I struggled with it a little bit at first because, the thought of, I can get up in front of a room of people and talk, but then 10 minutes before it happens, it's just like, oh, what am I doing? Can I do it? Can I do it? All those thoughts start going through your head, and I always struggled with the first 5 to 10 minutes of any presentation I gave. The first 5 to 10 minutes was the hardest. But once I'm rolling through the subject matter, I was fine. So what I ended up doing is, my advice here to help get yourself used to that public speaking aspect is practice it in a safe place. But when I say practice, I don't mean like talk to yourself in the mirror or anything. What I did is, I used to work for a service provider before I came to work for Altaro, and every Friday we had an all-hands engineering meeting. So I made it a point to take the knowledge that I'd learned in the community and at conferences and to bring it back and train my fellow engineers at my place of work on that technology. Now, these are guys and women that I worked with every day, and we joked and we had a rapport. So, I mean, that's when I'm saying it's a quote-unquote safe place to practice your public speaking. It's a friendly crowd, right? And, we laugh and joke and it's interactive. And, I mean, by doing that, every couple of Fridays, that was a big thing for me. That really helped me out. So that would definitely be my suggestion to anyone who's trying to get over that fear of public speaking is, do it with a crowd that's friendly and just kind of train your peers on, the knowledge that you're looking to share with a greater community. So I don't know if you'd have any other suggestions or advice to give there, Rob?
For me, that really kind of struck home for me with public speaking, because I wasn't always like this, all jokes aside, but is that I used to go to a Toastmasters group. A Toastmasters is a group that's throughout this country, actually even international affiliates all over the place. Right. And it's a group dedicated to speaking. And the one bit of advice that a Toastmaster, that's someone that is like very adept at what they've, kind of gone through all these phases of the Toastmasters, is that don't look at the crowd when you're speaking to them. Speak to an individual. And look and talk like you're talking to one individual. And I'll tell you, it's really helped me out every time.
Because now it's a conversation instead of a presentation.
Exactly.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. The one area, so I've always adopted that idea too. That really does help. The one area that I started struggling with then was when I started doing webinars and podcasts, because now while the audience is there, I don't see the audience. I see a computer screen or the wall of my office or whatever, and the thing that I've had to focus on doing is looking at the webcam, right? I'm talking to the audience through a webcam, and it's easy to forget that you're talking to a virtual audience. So you'd be over here doing some stuff, and looking at your monitor over here. You're not connecting with the.
I'm guilty of that too, so I'm still in that thing. But go ahead.
But no, you're I don't notice it with you, but you see some webinars and stuff, and people they're not looking at the audience. So what I do to kind of help with that is, I have a little cat, like a little tiny picture of a cat taped to the back of the webcam, and it's just a reminder for me.
God.
Talk to the cat. So just get a funny picture or something, It's just a reminder for yourself who you're presenting to. So, when I'm talking to you, the viewers right now, I'm talking to the cat on the back of my webcam.
Oh, hashtag talking to the cat. Okay, that'll be going out a lot. This podcast.
Right, exactly. So, well, I think that kind of wraps up our MVP tip for the month. I think we're getting to our interview next, aren't we, Rob?
Yeah, this is the cool stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
So I think we mentioned it earlier. We talked to Rossen Atanassov at Microsoft. He's on the Edge team, and we talked to him all about Microsoft Edge. So I think let's cut over to that. Rob, what do you think?
Let's go. Rock and roll.
All right, let's take a look. Well, hey, everyone. Andy and Rob here. And
Rob. Yep, go ahead.
Right. And we're joined by Rossen Atanassov from the Edge team. How's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely.
We're really psyched to actually be here in your office. Edge is obviously a really cool browser, that up-and-coming browser. But, what we want to know at the beginning here is a little bit about you. I mean, How did you get involved with Microsoft? How did you get involved with Edge? Kind of give us your little history.
Sure. So it's actually interesting enough because Rob and I go way back.
Oh God, here we go.
I don't know, what, 15 years maybe?
Wow.
Yeah, something like that.
It's
Yeah,
about 15 years ago. We used to work in a little software shop in Boston. I then moved to Canada to do a bit of studies. And then one thing led to another. Microsoft hired me, and I started working on a product called Internet Explorer, which still exists.
I think we know
Still
what that is.
exists.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I am part of the core rendering team. I work on things like layout, CSS, SVG, layout basically of anything and everything that goes through the pipeline, as well as all of the performance characteristics of the runtime. And I do a lot of work both internally in the team. I have a team of people that I work with very closely to advance the web platform, as well as externally through communities such as the W3C, where we do standardize a lot of the web technologies and languages.
Awesome.
I happen to co-chair the CSS working group, where we advance CSS as a language.
Oh, okay.
You got a few jobs going on.
Yeah.
I
wear a lot of hats.
have a lot of hats. I unfortunately don't wear them too often, but when I do, I hope they look okay, and I do kind of a good job.
Did
of
I
wearing
hear
them.
that you do stuff with Windows API?
Yes, actually, that's another hat that I have to wear every now and then.
Wow, that's awesome.
Internally, I am part of the Windows API review board, where we get to scrutinize and criticize every single API that comes through the board that makes it eventually as part of the WinRT API service.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, good reason. I mean, all that stuff should be scrutinized before it makes it into the platform, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Makes sense. Well, did you want to talk about metrics and
so let's talk a little bit about Edge and how it's doing currently. What do the metrics look like for Edge, and then the global, we'll say, browser market share?
Yeah, definitely. So current browsers here. So it's interesting. When I came in, we had the product that I started on. IE was about 96% market share.
Yeah.
It was very, very different. Hallway to walk through, and the set of people that I work with had a very interesting kind of mind share that we, having this big body of users that you have to carry forward.
Right.
The metrics and the kind of different metrics that we had to live by were mostly around security and not breaking the web. So not breaking the web was our motto for up until like maybe IE9. Like we were very very careful not to break the web. Now since then, Chrome, which is the current market leader, has overtaken this spot, and now they are the one responsible for not breaking the web. And so Edge is the browser that we released about a little less than 3 years ago.
Right.
So it's a fairly new product in terms of a browser in the kind of lifetime of browsers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And since then, we have forked the rendering engine from Trident, which is the rendering engine of IE.
Okay.
And we have made a ton of investments into moving closer to being able to support the modern web. And when I mean the modern web, I mean things like all of the latest standards that we put out by W3C through HTML, CSS, ECMAScript, JavaScript, and also try and innovate things like PWAs, which we shipped with Windows 8, with at the time we called them WWAs, which were Windows web applications. They were hosted apps. But the Chrome team has been doing also an amazing job in advancing the PWA story and getting us all together. By us, I mean all of the browser vendors in the market, including Firefox and Safari, and really kind of progressing and pushing the web platform as one of the most and biggest kind of application platforms that exists in history.
Right.
Thinking about having about 4.5, close to 5 trillion websites out there, we have a pretty tall order of like how we develop features,
Right.
how we manage,
Right.
plus having hundreds and hundreds of millions of users. Balancing act is really, really difficult for us.
Yeah, when you think about it that way, I mean, I would say that the web browser as a thing in the world today, people don't really think about it that much.
No.
Somebody opens up their
Very
laptop.
transparent.
Exactly. Somebody opens up their laptop and they say, oh, Facebook.com or wherever they're going. They don't think about everything that is required for that to work, right?
And typically it's like the defaults.
Right.
I click on a link in Outlook and Edge pops up.
Right.
And
Right.
who's going through some of these efforts to flip over the defaults?
Right.
But it's a good landing place for someone to really get used to understand Edge.
Right.
Because I will say, when I first saw Edge, it was a little scary.
Mm-hmm. How so? What was?
I just felt it was just a wipe and we'll say a refresh of IE.
Okay.
And I was like, I couldn't understand how to use it that much.
Sure.
And then I got the gist of like, oh, okay, this is starting to feel Chrome-ish.
Yeah. That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
Yeah.
That's a fair point, and in fact, the feeling Chrome-ish is not accidental.
Okay.
I mentioned something in the beginning, which was being able to support the modern web. The reality is the content usually chases whatever the market leader
Right.
is. So if that is Chrome, that's what the majority of the content will make, at least the modern content, will go through the effort and make sure that that's where they work the best. Having so many users use the browser as their primary application of day-to-day activity means that if I'm a company that invests in online presence, let's say I'm either Facebook or your eBay or pick your top web application.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
These are very, very, very sophisticated applications. These are not the websites of 20 years ago when you go and just read, click a link,
Right.
read.
Right.
Maybe you'll hear a sound or maybe see a video like this.
Right.
It was huge,
I remember
right?
that.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And your picture would render
Exactly. Yes, we'll buffer and we'll bitblit 150 pixels and then
Right.
we'll buffer and then we'll bitblit
Right.
again. These times are gone. I mean, we have a runtime today that renders at 60 frames a second. Most browser usage is in full screen.
Mm-hmm.
right.
So if you compare this to, say, a game that you play, it's not that much different. You have
Yeah.
a scene which refreshes, like we are chasing the
It's an interesting way to
we're
look
chasing
at
the
it.
vissing of the monitor every 60 seconds,
Interesting.
making sure that we want to
Yeah.
allow script to run, process input from the user. So if they click, if they mouse over something that is supposed to trigger some styles that change the background from red to blue to capture your attention, these are the things that we need to go and make sure that we can fit within 16 milliseconds and push it through the
Wow.
through the render frame and down to the GPU to go get rasterized and put on the screen.
60 milliseconds is not a lot of time.
So 16.
16.
So,
16.
yes, because
Yeah.
we are chasing 60 frames per second, right?
Right.
And so the time affordances of pushing the entire pipeline through parsing object model, working with the document object model tree, rendering, hit testing, answering questions to the rest of the OS.
Right.
The expectation, it's a really high performance real time runtime, which has the added expectations of tons and tons of content that meets really at the user
Right.
machine for the first time. You have libraries that get pulled from different CDNs that have never worked together, expected to give pleasant experience to the end user. You have developers today, they just link and require a bunch of libraries. These libraries maybe require some other libraries. They have no idea what really will get composed and bundled up at the end of the day on a
Right.
certain device. And then you have your device plethora of all kinds of devices with all kinds of hardware characteristics. So when you start looking at all of these different requirements and expectations,
Right.
our job is peachy.
Like
Who
you said,
knew Edge? No,
Yeah.
that was so complex. No.
well, it's like you said, it's a tall order to accommodate all those different things. Definitely. Wow, that's really interesting. Some of the inner workings of that. I mean, just stuff that you'd never stop to think of it from a user perspective, even from an IT pro perspective, to actually stop and think about how it really works. That's really interesting. So,
Well, I got a question here.
Yeah.
So what do we have down the pipe for Edge? I mean, what is something that you can kind of tell us about Edge that is coming down, a cool feature, something of that nature?
So one of the new things that we're shipping out with RS4, obviously support for PWAs. This is something really cool. We are very excited to join.
For those that don't know what a PWA is, if you want to explain.
They're basically web applications that will appear in any of the different application stores
Right.
on the different OSs and devices.
Okay.
And at the end of the day it's an application written on the web stack that has native look and feel. The expectations of performance and everything that I mentioned earlier are
Right.
still there. So we are really targeting applications that feel native to the whatever operating system or environment you're in, with minimal investment from the application developers to support this vast majority of devices.
gotcha. Okay.
So really taking advantage of all of the advancements that we've been doing in the presentation platform through CSS and media queries and being adaptable layouts so that you don't have to go and
Right.
redo your application for 20 different sizes of screens.
That's a big deal because,
It
I
is.
mean, you think about just somebody using an iPhone. I mean, even from, turning it from a portrait mode to widescreen,
Yeah.
the user expectation there is that it's going to just work.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know?
Exactly. So these are PWAs. Another thing that we have is we are going to be shipping with RS4 service workers. Service workers are big. This is something that a lot of the big applications such as Facebook are now starting to take full advantage of. And it really is, if you think about it, it really gives web application developers the ability to build more and more experience that will feel and look like native applications, or what people perceive as native applications
Okay.
on Windows.
Gotcha.
Wow.
A lot of exciting stuff coming down the
That's
pipeline.
exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Well, you have a question? Go ahead.
I was going to say, so, I mean, with all that new functionality, and, I mean, with any application in general, it's never truly done, right? I mean, there's always that development cycle. So for the folks in the community that are excited about all the new stuff, are using it,
Yeah.
where can they go to provide feedback? How can they help Microsoft make the
How can they
best
help
browser out there? Exactly. How can
Right.
how can they help you?
So we have a number of channels that we look for feedback. If there's something that you don't see working in Edge, if you have a problem with Edge, you can just go and tweet to MS Edge Dev
Okay.
and then mention that this is a problem. What this is going to do for us is it's actually going to, we have a bot that's going to go and generate a bug directly into our bug database.
That's awesome.
Okay.
And that's going to come directly to us. We have a set of people that go and look
Is there
at
a
all of
hashtag
these three
that
actions.
we have to throw
Yes, the hashtag is something which I will have to give you later.
Yeah,
Okay,
no worries.
that's fine.
So
That's fine.
I'm sure there will be a blip somewhere in the video.
Oh,
or
yeah.
the else guys
Yeah,
that
yeah.
will tell you
Yep.
what the hashtag is. But yes, there's a hashtag that you can tweet to. And like I said, this is going to give us direct feedback for something that, hey, also if you like it, tweet to us. We don't mind bugs that say, hey, this works really well.
Gotcha.
You can use the Windows Insider feedback. That
Right.
is also going to generate bugs.
Yeah, and there's
for
actually, I
us.
thought in the menu I noticed
There
report
is.
feedback.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you have difficulties with using the product, if you see things that work in one browser but not in Edge, tell us about it. We want to double down and fix all of these issues.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I would assume that applies to not only public websites, but to web-based tools at ITPro is like, I could think of all kinds of different web-based utilities.
My company, so I work for Five9.
Exactly.
We have a web-based product.
Yes.
And again, it would apply to those type of products.
Yeah, exactly. So I imagine you want to work with those vendors to make sure that things are rendering correctly and people are able to use Edge to access and use those tools.
Yeah, so reality is we don't hear all that much feedback. I mean, contrary to popular belief where, people think that, well, you have, tons and tons and tons of reports. We don't have that many reports.
Gotcha.
Also, here's another lens to look at this. The major big websites that have funding and hundreds of developers working there, when they see a problem, they're going to go and fix it themselves.
Right.
So they're not going to come and wait for us to fix something. Usually what we find most valuable is you go to a website like a mom and pop shop website that was built 15 years ago and it doesn't work correctly. Like this website is sitting on CDN somewhere, no one's going to go and update it. And if this website is broken in Edge or not performing as expected, we want to know about it. We want to make sure that these, like the tail end of the web, works just as well as the head of the web, which is constantly evolving and developing.
That makes sense.
So I have one final question.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't have to answer. What is your secondary browser other than Edge?
Sure. So I use all browsers on a daily basis.
Oh, really? Cool.
Being part of the core rendering engine, I constantly have feedback similar to what I mentioned earlier in the form of bugs or people just reporting issues. And I have to go and compare. So I constantly use Chrome, I constantly use Firefox, I use Edge, I have IE obviously on Windows 10. So I use all of the browsers that I can get my hands on and compare. Definitely. Yeah. I actually have a version of Opera, I don't remember, it's 11 or something, just the one with Presto before they snapped to WebKit, just so that I can go and compare for reference point what the Presto rendering engine was able to do.
Wow,
interesting.
That's cool.
So we take data where we can find it.
Right.
That
makes sense.
It's good to know that the browser team is really making advances and really trying to understand the end user and and make that web not break.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Exactly.
Definitely.
Well, cool. Hey, Rossen, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. It's been great talking to you and learning more about Edge and kind of the inner workings. And I want to say thanks to everyone who's watching out there. Be sure to check out our other episodes and other great interviews. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Well, hey, Rob, we're back. That was a really, really cool interview. I mean, like I said, Edge is doing way more than I ever thought it was doing. So the one thing that Rossen did mention that kind of really struck with me is back when Internet Explorer was the big dog, they were talking about they kind of had to be careful with development, right? Because they didn't want to break the internet. So it's just some of the things you never think about, right? So
well, that goes by the market share.
Yeah.
At one point, IE's market share was through the roof.
Oh yeah.
And to this day, in the latest builds of Windows 10, IE is still there.
Still there. Yep. So yeah, that was a great interview, and I hope you, the viewers, really enjoyed it. And if you have any follow-up questions, definitely be sure to use the comment section below this video, and we'll try to get you some answers there. So, well, that Rob, I think we're just
when we talk about our next episode?
Yeah, that's right. So we have another Microsoft MVP on for our next episode, Clint Wyckoff. So
very exciting.
Yeah, so we talked to him about the company he works for, Detrium, and some of the stuff that they're doing in the industry. So that was really cool. We're excited to share that in the July episode of the MVPITPro podcast. So be sure to take a look at that. If you want to get a notification for when that comes out, you can subscribe to us on YouTube. We're also on iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter We've got a couple of different avenues that you can use to kind of keep track of the show and make sure you get a notification when the next episode is available. So, well, with that, Rob, I think I'm good to go. You want to add anything else before we sign off?
No, it's the summer, and let's roll. We'll see you next time.
That sounds good.
Hoo-hoo.
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for watching. We really appreciate you coming back to watch us every month. And again, you've been tuning in for this month's episode of the MVPITPro podcast, the MVPITPro podcast, the only podcast where you enter an IT Pro and leave an MVP. With that, thanks for watching. Have a great day.